It was one of those typical Fridays in my 11th grade English class, the last period of the day, and a period everyone was more than ready to finish. Spring break was just around the corner, and the week had been dragging on forever. The tension in the air was almost tangible, like everyone was holding their breath, just waiting to be released for that long-anticipated week of freedom. Our English teacher, Ms. Walsh, seemed to sense the restlessness. She was one of those teachers who just knew how to read a room. So instead of pushing through with more essays and poetry discussions, she decided to let us wind down a bit. She told us we'd do something fun and interactive, letting us choose from a few options on an educational games website. In no time, we were huddled around her computer, challenging each other on a geography quiz, laughing over the absurd mistakes we made, and the way we all seemed to forget where places were on the map. The laughter lightened the room, and it felt good, almost like being at a friend's house instead of stuck in class. I remember the exact moment it all changed. Just as my friend Jamie managed to answer a particularly tough question about the capital of Peru, the sound of the principal's voice broke through the speakers with a harsh, abrupt crackle. Attention, teachers, this is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. Initiate full lockdown immediately. Secure all doors and windows. Stay away from the windows and keep students quiet. Ms. Walsh's face, normally calm and reassuring, paled almost instantly. I could feel my heart beating faster. It didn't take long for her to click off the projector and move quickly to the door, her hands trembling slightly as she locked it. Without a word, she motioned us toward the corner of the room, where we huddled together, trying to stay as quiet as possible. The hum of the air conditioning went silent, and so did the buzzing of the fluorescent lights. They must have cut the power. My hands started to feel clammy, and I realized I was shaking just a little. The atmosphere in the room shifted. We weren't laughing or even whispering now, just sitting in eerie, unnatural silence. All I could hear was the shallow breathing of my classmates and the sound of my own heart thudding loudly in my chest. Minutes passed, maybe only 2 or 3, but they felt like hours. Then came the sound of footsteps. Heavy, slow, deliberate. They echoed down the hallway, growing louder with each step. My heart raced even faster. I glanced around at my classmates, who were equally wide-eyed and tense. No one dared to move. Suddenly, we heard a loud, guttural shout that echoed down the corridor. It was a man's voice, wild and angry, shouting something I couldn't quite make out. But the words didn't matter. The tone alone was enough to chill my bones. I caught a glimpse of Jamie, her face pale, her hands pressed tightly over her mouth, and I could see the fear in her eyes. She wasn't alone. 2 other girls in the corner had started to cry quietly, the silent tears streaming down their cheeks as they tried to keep from sobbing aloud. The footsteps grew louder, each one falling with a harsh, deliberate echo that made it sound like he was kicking the walls. I tried to press myself further into the corner, to make myself as small as possible. Ms. Walsh put a finger to her lips, her eyes pleading with us to stay silent. None of us needed the reminder. We barely dared to breathe. The noise grew louder as the man approached, his steps punctuated by furious shouts and the sound of fists slamming against lockers. He was cursing, screaming about something incomprehensible, and there was no mistaking the pure rage in his voice. It was primal, raw, and terrifying. I felt the hairs on my arms prickling as he drew closer, each slam of his fists seeming to rattle the walls. Finally, he reached our door. My heart sank, and I could feel my stomach twist as he banged on it, hard enough to shake the hinges. One of the girls couldn't help herself. She let out a tiny, terrified whimper. The man stopped for a second, as if he'd heard her, and I saw Ms. Walsh's face go white as she held a finger to her lips, her expression desperate. "Open up!" the man screamed, pounding his fists against the door so hard I thought it would shatter. He tried the handle, jerking it violently. The door didn't budge, and I thanked every higher power I could think of that Ms. Walsh had locked it. His voice grew louder, his fists slamming even harder, and I could feel the raw fear from everyone in the room. Jamie was clutching my arm, so tightly I could feel her fingernails digging into my skin. Ms. Walsh was watching the door with terrified eyes, her lips pressed tightly together. Every second felt like an hour. I kept imagining what would happen if he somehow forced his way in. I couldn't shake the thought, no matter how hard I tried. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the banging stopped. We heard the sound of his footsteps again, moving away from our door, his voice still echoing down the hallway, still filled with rage and anger. I didn't dare to breathe until the sound had faded completely. We sat there, frozen, for what felt like hours. In reality, it was probably only minutes, but time had lost all meaning. Eventually, we heard the principal's voice again, a bit calmer this time, but still tense. He explained that a man had somehow entered the building and was causing a disturbance, and that all teachers were to remain in lockdown until the authorities arrived. He reassured us that staff had locked down all doors and were trying to contain the situation, but I could tell from his tone that he was just as afraid as we were. We stayed huddled in the corner for what felt like an eternity, waiting in tense, oppressive silence. Occasionally, we heard distant shouts, but they grew less frequent over time. At one point, I thought I heard the sound of sirens outside the school. Finally, the principal came back on the loudspeaker, his voice calmer now. He explained that the authorities had arrived, and they were going to escort students out of the building in small groups. We were instructed to follow any police officer's directions carefully and to leave as quietly as possible. Ms. Walsh led us single file to the door, and I could see that she was still shaking. The hallways were eerily silent, and for the first time, I noticed the way the usual hum of the school, the constant noise of footsteps, chatter, and laughter, was absent, replaced only by the sound of our footsteps and the occasional murmur from the police officers lining the hall. As we exited the building, I saw police cars and an ambulance parked outside, their lights flashing brightly in the dim evening light. Students and teachers stood in small clusters, whispering to each other with nervous glances, while parents hurried over to embrace their kids, some of them in tears. In the following days, we learned more about what had happened. The man, apparently someone who'd been dealing with serious mental health issues, had managed to enter the school through an unlocked side door. He had been ranting about a variety of things, none of them making much sense, before he started wandering the hallways, banging on doors and screaming at students and teachers alike. Fortunately, he hadn't harmed anyone, but the fear he'd caused left its own kind of damage. The school took new safety measures after that incident. Security cameras were installed, more doors were locked during school hours, and a resource officer was stationed at the entrance. We were given mandatory lockdown drills, and our teachers were trained on how to handle emergency situations. For a long time afterward, I couldn't shake the memories of that Friday. I'd close my eyes and hear his screams, feel the way Jamie's nails dug into my arm, see the raw fear in Ms. Walsh's eyes as she watched the door. Every time we had a lockdown drill, my heart would race a little faster, and I'd find myself tensing up, ready to relive that moment. I don't know if they ever found the man, or if he got the help he clearly needed. Maybe he was out there somewhere, still struggling, still lost. Or maybe he was finally receiving the care that could keep him, and others, safe. All I know is that day changed something in me, something deep, something that has stayed with me ever since. At my school, lunch is split into 2 periods. First lunch is for 6th graders and half of the 7th graders, while the second lunch is for the rest of the 7th graders and all of the 8th graders. It was early November, and the days were already feeling shorter, darker, and colder. That particular day was one of those gloomy, gray ones where the clouds seemed to press down low, casting everything in shadows. My friends and I were in the cafeteria during first lunch, trying to make each other laugh over a few embarrassing moments from class the day before. Just as my friend Lily started telling us about her weekend plans, we heard a loud, booming sound from somewhere outside. It was the kind of sound that made everyone freeze, unsure whether it was thunder, construction, or something else. A few seconds later, we heard it again, 2 sharp, echoing booms that made everyone look around, eyes wide with confusion and worry. I figured it was just thunder. It definitely looked like rain was on the way. But then a third and fourth boom followed, and this time, the cafeteria went dead silent. Almost immediately, chaos broke out. A few students started screaming, and suddenly, everyone was moving, some rushing toward the exits, others ducking down instinctively. I could feel my own heart hammering in my chest, and for a split second, I was frozen, unsure whether to laugh at everyone for overreacting or to start running with them. That's when campus security rushed in. The look on their faces told us everything we needed to know. This was no drill, and it definitely wasn't thunder. One of the security guards, a tall, broad-shouldered guy named Officer Tim, held up his hands, shouting for everyone to quiet down. Listen up. This is a lockdown. Everyone needs to move immediately to the gym and stay calm. Stay in line, and don't leave your friends behind. Now go. The cafeteria burst into frantic movement as everyone scrambled to follow his instructions. Students who had been in line for lunch dropped their trays and drinks, leaving behind everything they'd been carrying. My friends and I stayed close together, following the mass of students toward the gym. I noticed that even the teachers looked anxious, glancing around as if they were unsure what to expect. When we entered the gym, I saw that the teachers and security staff were already covering the windows with blackout curtains, making sure no one could see in or out. The gym was enormous, a huge open space lined with rows of bleachers and high windows that usually let in a lot of light. But now, it felt like we were being shut inside, cut off from the world outside. Teachers were positioned at every exit, their faces tense and watchful. My friend Josh was fidgeting next to me, his eyes darting around the room. "What do you think is going on?" he whispered, his voice barely audible over the murmurs and whispers of our classmates. "No idea," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Maybe it's a drill?" He shook his head. "It doesn't feel like a drill." Just then, I spotted Officer Tim talking with one of the other security guards near the door. He looked serious, his eyes scanning the room as if he was counting heads. Josh, being braver than I was, decided to go over and see if he could find out what was happening. I watched as he approached one of the teachers and asked a few questions. After a moment, he came back, his face pale. "You know the houses across from the main entrance?" he said, his voice low. "Yeah," I replied, frowning. "Why?" "There's a guy barricaded inside one of them. Apparently, he's got weapons, and he's threatening to hurt himself and anyone who tries to get near him. The police are there now, but they're worried he might have a gun. That's why they're keeping us locked down." I felt a chill run down my spine. The thought of someone like that being so close to our school was unsettling. I glanced at my other friends, who were listening in, and I could see the fear in their eyes. No one said a word. We just sat there, tense and silent, as the minutes dragged by. The gym grew quieter as more students settled in, most of them huddled together in small groups, whispering nervously. I could feel the tension in the air. Everyone was on edge, glancing toward the doors and windows as if they expected something to happen at any moment. After a while, my friend Emily leaned over and said, "Do you guys remember that guy I told you about? The one my mom saw on Halloween?" "Yeah. Didn't she say he was acting weird?" Josh asked, looking at her intently. Emily nodded, her face serious. She saw him at his window, writing on the glass with something red. She thought it was just paint or fake blood, like for Halloween. But now, I don't know. She said he looked kind of unhinged, muttering to himself and pacing back and forth. She didn't think much of it at the time, but now I'm wondering if it was the same guy. I shivered, feeling a wave of unease wash over me. The idea that someone so unstable was living just across the street from us, watching us, was more than a little terrifying. As the minutes ticked by, the gym grew colder and more uncomfortable. Kids were starting to shift restlessly, whispering nervously to each other. Some of the younger students looked like they were on the verge of tears, and a few were already crying softly, their friends trying to comfort them. I could feel my own anxiety building, a tight knot forming in my stomach. After what felt like an eternity, one of the administrators finally stepped into the gym. She looked calm, but there was a tension in her eyes that betrayed her worry. She held up her hands for silence, and the gym gradually quieted down. "Thank you all for your patience," she said, her voice steady but a little strained. "The situation outside is under control, and the authorities are handling it. We're going to begin escorting students back to their classrooms one group at a time. Please stay with your teachers and follow their instructions carefully. We want to make sure everyone gets back safely The relief in the room was palpable. You could almost feel the tension start to lift as the teachers began organizing us into rows, ready to lead us back to our classes. As my group was led out of the gym, I felt a strange mix of relief and lingering fear. Part of me wanted to forget the whole thing, but another part couldn't shake the thought of that man in the house across the street. Back in class, everyone was buzzing with whispered conversations, trying to piece together what had happened. I overheard snippets of rumors. Some kids were saying he'd been watching the school for weeks. Others claimed he'd threatened to come onto campus. No one knew what was true, but the fear and uncertainty lingered. After school, I learned a little more. The man had apparently been dealing with severe mental health issues for years, and his behavior had only gotten worse recently. According to a neighbor, he'd been seen talking to himself, muttering about people who were out to get him, and writing strange messages on his windows. The police had been called several times before, but nothing had ever been done. This time, though, he had barricaded himself inside his house, and when officers tried to approach, he'd threatened them, shouting that he would hurt anyone who came near him. It turned out he lived right next to my friend Brandy, who shared even more disturbing details. She told me that he'd once come out on Halloween, standing at his window with a kitchen knife, cutting his arm and smearing the blood on the glass. Brandy had thought it was just a creepy Halloween prank, but now it was clear that he was much more unstable than anyone had realized. In the days that followed, our school increased security measures, adding new locks and cameras, and hiring a resource officer to patrol the grounds. The lockdown became a huge topic of discussion, with students and teachers sharing their experiences and speculating about the man across the street. For weeks afterward, every time I passed those houses across from the school, I'd feel a slight twinge of fear, wondering if he was watching us, if he might come back. It took a long time for that feeling to fade, and even now, whenever I hear a loud noise or see a flash of movement from those windows, I can't help but remember that day. The day we realized that the things we fear aren't always as far away as we'd like to believe. The IT department at Riverside High School wasn't exactly what most people would picture when thinking of a school's tech hub. Instead of the sleek, modern setup you might expect, it was tucked away in the basement of the aging building, past the boiler room and storage areas filled with dusty theater props and forgotten sports equipment. But our little corner of that basement? That was different. I'd only been working there for 3 months, fresh out of college with my IT degree, but I'd already grown fond of our cozy 3-person office. It was an oasis in the otherwise cluttered basement, 3 spacious desks, modern computers, even a wall-mounted TV that we'd sometimes use for testing the school streaming system or catching a game during lunch breaks, though we'd never admit that to administration. The best part was the industrial-grade air conditioning unit that kept our sensitive equipment cool, a luxury that made us the envy of the teachers stuck in their stuffy classrooms above. I owed this job to Mr. Harrison, Mrs. Chen, and Mr. Roberts, my former computer science teachers who had become mentors and friends over the years. They'd seen potential in me during high school, letting me help troubleshoot lab issues and even assist in teaching younger students. When the IT position opened up, they'd advocated strongly for me despite my limited experience. Technical skills can be taught, Mr. Harrison had told the principal, but finding someone who truly understands our school community, that's rare. My coworkers, Tom and Marcus, were easy to get along with. Both in their 40s, they'd been managing the school's technology infrastructure for over a decade. They had an efficient system worked out. Marcus handled networking and security, Tom managed the administrative systems, and I was learning both while taking on the endless stream of help desk requests from teachers and staff. Everything was going smoothly until that Wednesday in October. The morning had started normally enough. I'd spent it setting up new Chromebooks for the freshman class while Tom and Marcus were upstairs dealing with some issues in the administration office. I just sat down to eat my lunch, turkey sandwich, apple, and those addictive salt and vinegar chips I couldn't seem to quit, when my phone buzzed with an alert from the school's emergency system. Lockdown protocol initiated. This is not a drill. Secure your location immediately. My heart started racing. We'd had lockdown drills before, but that this is not a drill message made my blood run cold. I quickly dimmed my computer screens and turned off the lights in our office space. That's when I realized just how vulnerable our location was. Our office didn't even have a proper door, just an open archway. The basement door at the top of the stairs had a lock, but it had been broken for months, another item on the endless maintenance backlog. I tried calling Tom and Marcus, but got no answer from either of them. My hands were shaking as I typed out text messages. "Are you guys okay? What's happening upstairs?" No response. Minutes ticked by with excruciating slowness. In the darkness, every small sound seemed amplified. The hum of the servers, the clicking of the air conditioning unit, my own breathing. I huddled under my desk, trying to make myself as small as possible while keeping my phone's brightness at its lowest setting. The basement's thick concrete walls meant I couldn't hear anything from the floors above. The not knowing was almost worse than anything else. After what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, I heard it, the distinct creak of the basement door opening. My heart nearly stopped. Footsteps on the stairs, trying to be quiet but echoing in the empty space. They weren't the familiar footsteps of Tom or Marcus. I'd learned to recognize those over the past months. These were different, hesitant, but purposeful. I held my breath as the footsteps grew closer to our office. Should I call out? What if it was just a teacher looking for shelter? What if it wasn't? The footsteps entered our office space. In the dim light filtering down the stairwell, I could make out a pair of boots stopping near my desk. My phone chose that exact moment to vibrate with an incoming message, the sound seemingly as loud as a gunshot in the quiet space. The boots turned toward my desk. I made a split-second decision and spoke in a whisper. "Hello? I'm the IT staff." "Oh, thank God," a male voice whispered back. "I was looking for somewhere to hide. I'm here for a parent-teacher conference, and they told everyone to find shelter immediately." He crouched down near my desk, and I could see him better now, middle-aged man in khakis and a blue button-down shirt, slightly out of breath. "I'm James," he said, extending his hand. "They didn't tell us what's happening upstairs. Do you know?" Before I could answer, my phone lit up with a message from Tom. "Don't trust anyone coming down there. Suspect is male, 40s, business casual, claiming to be a parent. Armed. Shot fired in main office. Police en route." The man, James, must have seen the color drain from my face. His expression changed subtly, hardening. His hand moved toward his waist. What happened next was pure instinct. I shoved my rolling chair at him with all my strength, sending him stumbling backward. I bolted for the server racks, ducking behind them just as the first shot rang out. The sound was deafening in the confined space, leaving my ears ringing. I crawled through the maze of cables and equipment, thankful for all the times I'd had to navigate this space to check connections. I could hear him moving, searching, but he didn't know the layout like I did. I made it to the old coal chute, a remnant from the building's earlier days that we used as a cable run to the upper floors. It was a tight fit, but fear gave me motivation. As I squeezed through the shaft, another shot rang out, the bullet sparking off metal somewhere below me. I emerged in a first-floor utility closet just as the first police officers were entering the building. They took him into custody as he tried to exit the basement stairs, his weapon still in hand. The full story came out later. James Wheeler had been fired from his job as a school security guard the previous year after several concerning incidents. He blamed the administration, particularly the head of security, for ruining his life. He'd come back seeking revenge, using his knowledge of the building to his advantage. If he hadn't run into me in the basement, he might have evaded capture much longer. The school installed proper doors and security systems in the basement after that. Our cozy little office got a solid door with a keypad lock, but it was months before I could eat lunch down there without jumping at every sound, before the darkness felt comfortable rather than threatening. Tom and Marcus started keeping a mini fridge stocked with my favorite salt and vinegar chips. "Combat pay," they joked, but I knew it was their way of showing they were glad I'd made it through that day. Mr. Harrison, Mrs. Chun, and Mr. Roberts stopped by more often, usually with coffee and conversations that carefully avoided discussing that Wednesday. A year later, I'm still here, still managing the school's technology from our basement office. The new security measures make it feel less like the cozy space it once was, but also safer. The incident changed me, made me more cautious, more aware. But it also showed me something about myself I never knew. When pushed to the limit, I could think clearly, act decisively. Sometimes, late in the afternoon when the building is quiet, I can still hear the echoes of those footsteps on the stairs. But now they remind me not just of fear, but of survival. Of the day I learned that courage isn't about being fearless, it's about acting despite your fear. The school installed a proper security system after that, with cameras covering every angle of the basement and stairwell. The footage is monitored 24/7, and all doors now have working locks and electronic access controls. Sometimes I miss the casual openness of our old setup, but then I remember that day, and I'm grateful for the changes. Tom and Marcus still joke about how I leveled up from IT support to action hero that day, but we all know how close it came to ending differently. The police later found a list in Wheeler's car, names of administration staff he planned to target. I wasn't on that list. I was just an obstacle he hadn't planned for, a random variable in what he thought would be a straightforward plan. That's the thing about working in IT. You get used to dealing with unexpected problems, finding solutions on the fly. Usually, those problems involve malfunctioning printers or forgotten passwords. But that day, those problem-solving skills saved my life. Now, whenever new staff complain about our strict security protocols or the multiple layers of access control, I just smile and help them through the process. Some inconveniences are worth the peace of mind they bring. The school counselor suggested I might want to find a different job, one with less traumatic associations. But this is where I belong. This basement, with its humming servers and temperamental air conditioning, is still my place. The incident changed how I see it, but it didn't change how I feel about the work or the school community. Every morning, as I descend those stairs into the basement, I remember not just the fear and the chaos, but also the strength I found in myself that day. The basement is different now, better lit, more secure, properly monitored. But more importantly, I'm different, stronger, more aware, more appreciative of the quiet moments and the simple pleasure of feeling safe. They say that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. I don't know if that's always true, but I do know that surviving that day taught me something valuable about myself and about life. Sometimes the scariest moments show us what we're truly capable of. Sometimes the darkest places can lead us to our brightest realizations. Now, when new IT staff join our team, part of their orientation includes security protocols and emergency procedures. I'm always the one who conducts this training. I tell them my story, not to frighten them, but to emphasize why we take security so seriously. Every locked door, every security camera, every access code exists for a reason. In a school, we're not just protecting equipment, we're protecting people. The incident changed the way the whole school approaches security. What was once seen as an inconvenience is now understood as a necessity. Teachers who used to prop open doors for convenience now make sure they're properly secured. Students who once complained about having to wear ID badges now understand their importance. Sometimes it takes a crisis to create lasting change. But life goes on. The basement is still where I spend my days, troubleshooting network issues, updating systems, and helping teachers with their tech problems. The servers still hum. The air conditioning still keeps us cool, and yes, we still occasionally catch a game on that wall-mounted TV during lunch breaks. Some things change, some stay the same, and that's exactly as it should be. Because that's what resilience really means. Not that you're unchanged by your experiences, but that you find a way to incorporate them into who you are and keep moving forward. Every day I walk down those stairs is a small victory, a reminder that fear didn't win. And in the end, that's what matters most. And that's it for today's stories. Each one a chilling reminder of how quickly a normal day can take a frightening turn. If you enjoyed this video and want to hear more suspenseful stories, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Don't forget to hit the bell icon so you never miss a new upload. Thanks for watching, and stay safe out there.